Welcome to the RAS Project, episode 95, a conversation about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family tech, and marketing. My name is Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. And joining me this morning is also my amazing sidekick, Courtenay Turner. Good morning, Courtenay. How are you?
Good morning. I am doing well. Monday. How are you doing?
Yes, it's Monday. It's Monday. If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, you will gather 100% real, raw, and unfiltered, life changing advice to help you level up in every aspect of your life and business and help you reach your goals and dreams. So, we got through Thanksgiving. Courtenay, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was great, actually. Yeah, I had I initially was going to go back home, see my mom, but then they put all these sanctions on our travels, and yeah, gosh forbid families should unite. So
I know.
yeah, no, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, apparently. So, I will be going to visit my mom, but I didn't go for the holiday because it was, they made it quite difficult. So I went to go visit a friend in Altadena, and it was really nice. She's a
Hmm.
fantastic cook, and she has a little kid, and she brought another friend over, so it was nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of Thanksgiving and all these sanctions, so my wife's family actually lives in Illinois, and the state of Illinois is probably one of the most horrendous right now with what's happening with COVID. I mean, I shit you not, like things are literally on a shutdown over there. In fact, I think I may have done something illegal by actually traveling my family to the state of Illinois because supposedly I don't think
Rebel.
yeah, like you're not, I guess you're not supposed to be doing that. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, really? Like I can't go visit family and like the one holiday to show thanks for?
Do you know what I find most impressive though? Is that this virus is really, really smart. So it
Hmm.
knows every time a holiday is coming. So it doesn't spike after the holiday when people have had their gatherings and their festivities. It spikes right before because it knows it's coming. So to make sure
Yeah.
that nobody can gather with family and loved ones. It's really impressive actually. And what's even more impressive is the science that we as human beings have implemented to be able to discover this about a virus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, it was actually really ironic. I mean, I was being very observant, while we traveled. So we traveled last week on Thanksgiving, and there's an interesting story about that I want to share. And I was observing all the restaurants because in the state of Illinois, no restaurant is to be open. They cannot operate their dining rooms, but we noticed so many restaurants that were open, and I'm like, thumbs up. I'm like, you
Yay!
guys, like,
Yeah, civil
you know,
disobedience. Awesome.
I know, right? And
Love
and
it.
but there were a lot, mainly chains that were like operating from like a contactless standpoint. That were still operating, but it was like a contactless type of experience. And I was like, I'm just glad to see, especially for local businesses. Like there were some local restaurants that I'm like, these guys can't close. If they close, they're gonna go under. Like it's just I can't fathom that. But the story I wanted to share
Yeah.
that for Thanksgiving is so on Thursday, we're getting ready to leave. Car is packed. Kids are in the car. I turn the key on the car to start, and the car won't start. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, what the hell? Like, I just pulled the car into the driveway 45 minutes ago, and it won't even start, right? And
Right.
so, to condense the story, is 45 minutes later, of course, I was able to get it to start. And then a couple of days later, found out that the car needed a new battery. So,
Oh
what an
no.
amazing so what an amazing way, to kick off a Thanksgiving holiday with the
No.
car not starting. Like I'm sitting here thinking, Clark Griswold will probably get a kick out of this. And
Right.
being Thanksgiving, by the way, for those of you don't know, I've already watched Christmas Vacation about 10 times, and that's just tip of the iceberg because it's my all-time favorite movie. And
Aw.
this yeah, it's this time of year that I watch it like a gazillion times because you just can't get enough of Clark W. Griswold. So it was really interesting, with this pandemic and like just seeing everything. And state of Illinois, like really being like literal on the lockdown, and it's challenging. It's frustrating to see, especially local businesses like having to operate in such way or not operate at all. You know, um,
Tragic. Really
so
tragic.
it really is. It really is. Before we move on, I just want to make a quick announcement for those who are tuning in for the first time. So this is obviously the RAS project, and we're multi-streaming every Monday and Friday on all platforms, starting at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. What I mean by all platforms is like we're everywhere on social media, basically. Like every social media platform there is, including Twitch and LinkedIn Live. We are streaming live. And you know what, Courtney? There's been some amazing feedback on Periscope that I've noticed.
Wow.
Like,
I have to get on there and
yeah.
I'm
So
so not familiar with Periscope.
yeah, absolutely. So, I was actually looking at, some of the stats and stuff, and I was able to see some amazing feedback on Periscope. Just a lot of people just, viewing and those views actually stacking up, week over week. So actually kind of gives me hope, because obviously the purpose behind the show is to add some value to people's lives, to share some perspective. And let's face it, I mean, we live in such a crazy world. Like, you can never get enough perspective. Another thing I wanted to mention actually is, so a couple weeks ago, I believe the Courtenay Turner podcast actually just went live, and you can check out her first episode on her new website at CourtenayTurner.com. So if you can check that out, and I'm telling you guys, Courtney's got an amazing story, and I keep saying this over and over and over because it is an amazing story. I mean, honestly, with what's happening with this pandemic right now, I invite anybody watching the RAS Project or listening to go and watch or listen to your story, because suddenly it'll make you go like, you know what? Well, fuck, maybe I just don't have that bad of a life. It just makes you really appreciate for the things that you have. And by the way, actually, I have to mention this. I didn't even know that you were actually wearing hearing aids up until a few weeks ago. Like,
Really?
I did not know that. I did not know that.
You want to know something really funny about that? I think I like in the middle of one of the episodes actually had what's really, really funny about that is a few years ago many years ago now, but when I first moved to LA, I had a roommate, and there was one point she was a Russian Israeli, so she had a very thick accent, and she said to me, so she was saying something, and I asked her to repeat herself, and she said, is my accent so terrible? You never understand me? And I said, oh, no. And she said, you don't have to make excuses. It's okay. I know I need to work on my accent. And I said, no, really, it's not you. It's really me. I'm deaf. And she was like, it's okay. Don't, I'll work on it. And I said, no, like I'm not deaf, but I wear hearing aids. Like I'm hearing impaired. And I take out my hearing aids and I show her, and she said, oh, is this why whenever I turn around or I go to the other room, you can't hear me? She said, do you need lips? And I said, yeah, that's how I learned how to speak. It's really funny, but I had been living with her for like 4 months at that point. So
yeah, and that is, and again, I'm such a huge fan of anyone that has a very powerful story, and 2020 has been such a strange year in so many ways. From the election to the pandemic to just everything. And actually last week being Thanksgiving, I was sort of reflecting on everything that has happened this year. And then suddenly, I kind of fell in this, stronger sense of gratitude, a state of appreciation, to where I started realizing, like, you know what? Like, I get to wake up every day. I've woken up every day in 2020. And everything that I've done, I mean, my life is going good. Family is happy. My business is growing. I'm making amazing connections. Obviously, meeting you in 2020 as well. And like suddenly, like coming from a place of like being humble and grateful and realizing that, 99% of the materialistic things in our lives just don't matter. They just really don't. Like, the things that truly matter are really the 1%. Like the fact that I can take my ass to the gym today, and knowing that I can, when maybe there's that one person that's like battling for their life right about now.
So
and
true.
suddenly makes you realize, like, maybe I don't have it so bad. So, and
Mhm.
and and the fact I mentioned actually the hearing aids is because most people actually have selective hearing, and people do, like, most people actually do have selective hearing because they choose what they
Right,
want to pay attention to.
right.
And so I applaud you, I really do, because speaker, trainer, pundit. I mean, you've done some really really amazing things. And again, I invite you guys listening and watching to definitely go check out the first episode of the Courtenay Turner podcast. It's a fascinating story. It'll give you chills down your back spine. I guarantee you that. Um,
Thank you.
so let's move on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the main topic here of this episode, and that is the one thing that separates you from others. So, you know what? The reason I wanted to talk about this today, Courtenay, is because I think too many people in 2020 are struggling to find themselves. In
Yeah.
fact, there's someone on Twitter that I've been following him for a while, posted a tweet, and it was something along the lines, and I'm going to butcher it, but the gist of the message was like, "What are you most thankful for, or what is the one thing that you're so thankful for in 2020?" And I had to think about it, and I was like, I guess finding myself really was like the biggest thing. Like, not that I was like completely lost, but like
Right.
finding myself, right? So let's talk about that. Like I feel 2020, too many people have been, their judgment has been clouded. They've been struggling with figuring out like who they are or
Yeah.
what's important to them in life and
Yeah.
in business, right? What's your take on that?
That's really fascinating to me, actually, because I think one of the things that I talked a lot about in the very beginning of the lockdown was that this was a really good time for introspection. And I think that most people have spent so much of their lives like looking outwards. And so they really don't know who they are. They
Yeah.
know like what their role is. They know how to, navigate, function, please others. They don't necessarily know who they are. Most people don't spend a whole lot of time looking inward. And I
Right.
kept saying this is a really good opportunity to do that, especially with, the lockdowns and whatnot. But I think what is a very interesting thing about what has happened with 2020 is that, I was kind of the opposite. I think because of a lot of my personal challenges, I've spent so much of
Hmm.
my life being introspective. I mean, when you can't see and you can't hear, there's really only inward to go. It's like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of, and I spent most of
Sure.
my childhood that way. So,
Yeah.
um, but I think that what's been really interesting that I've observed about 2020, and it's been such a roller coaster, is I think that people often confuse identity and, you know, self awareness and
Mm.
like authenticity. For lack of a better
Yeah.
word,
Yeah.
authenticity is quite the right word, but sense of self perhaps is probably a better one.
Hmm.
So they confuse sense of self for identity. And I think with 2020, there's been so much shift. And I think for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, a lot of identity has been taken from them.
Yeah.
I was actually really thinking about this for myself. I had started 2020 really, making some strides as a speaker and as an aerialist. And
Hmm.
I was about to compete in a pole competition. And I haven't done pole in months now. Not that I ever thought of myself as like a pole dancer, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was like it was a hobby, it was something, and I didn't do I wasn't doing the competition, as a career move or anything, but it was a huge part of, it was a hobby and something I was really passionate about.
Yeah.
I think that people, we have these things that are part of our routine, part of our passions, part of our makeup, and a lot of people start to think of that they tie their identity to it. And
Yeah.
then you see things like a lot of people's jobs have had to change because of the lockdowns. A lot of their environments have changed because of the lockdown. And when you start to think about that, then people start to question their identity because they feel lost. Well,
Yeah.
who am I if I no longer have this job? Who am I if I
Yeah.
can no longer, do aerial? Like,
Yeah, no, That's a really good point, and you brought up identity. Actually, I wanted to add to that because I had someone that messaged me on Instagram,
Okay.
and it's a friend, and we started kind of talking about, and this really goes to like what separates you from everyone else, which
Yeah.
identity is a big part of this, and basically the gist of the discussion was around compliance versus conformity.
Mm.
Right. And so here's what I mean by that is so I was in the state of Illinois this past weekend and I work out at Planet Fitness.
Okay.
Well, in the state of Illinois, you have to wear a mask everywhere you go, literally. And so Planet Fitness actually they had their locker rooms
Mhm.
shut down, and there was only like the men's and women's. And on the men's side, they had a changing room there, right? And that was the only thing that was open. But what most people didn't know is just that there's actually free locker rooms on the front that you can use. You set your
Okay.
own combo and you can use them at any time. So the reason I'm sharing this is because he was talking about how he's always had a problem being told things that he should do, right? Like
Mm.
given direction. And basically, I gave him an example. I said, look, just because I had to wear a mask, it wasn't going to stop me from exercising. And
Right.
that's the difference between compliance and conformity. I'm not conforming to like the sheep mentality, right? I'm being compliant. And as a result, I went in and I worked out for 2 hours.
Mhm.
Now, the difference in that is just that, and I was trying to give him the example and said, look, like, don't misconstrue that because I think a lot of people misconstrue that. And that really goes to identity, right? Like,
Mm.
who are you? Because I'm one of those people that I'm fierce as fuck. I just don't give a shit. Like, I mean, I'm me, I'll do what I want to do as long as I don't land in jail for doing something illegal, but for the most part, I am fierce, and so the example that I gave to him is like, don't misconstrue compliance versus conformity because I'm not conforming. I'm complying. And where there's will, there's power. So that's really goes back to who I am as identity is just like, I was thinking to myself, like, I'll be damned if a fucking mask is going to prohibit me from working out. I might suffer, but you know what? I'm going to suffer anyway, pedaling for 45 minutes on cardio alone. So, like, why not going, So, like, I think that's where a lot of people are struggling because of this pandemic, because of everything that's happening, because of the election, is that they're misconstruing so many things to where
Well,
they're not.
I would address. I mean, in that case
Mhm.
specifically, I would like to address this compliance versus
Sure.
conformity because so if you're in an establishment like you're in somebody else's business, if you want to patronize their business, you want to utilize their services, yeah, it makes sense that you would comply with their
Right.
requests. So, if a store says I'm only letting people in who wear purple hats, it's kind of
Right.
ludicrous. They might not get a whole lot of customers, but that's their purview. They can do that. I
Right.
only serve people who wear purple hats. That's up to them. But when you start, man, and then it's up to me to say, you know what, I really don't like purple hats, so I'm going to go to another store. But when it becomes pervasive and they're telling people they
Right.
need to wear masks outside in, their front yard, really? Why?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
their property. Like that's where it makes no sense to me at all. When it comes to you made that choice. So for you were like, I'm gonna suffer anyway, it's fine.
Yeah.
For me personally, wearing a mask while I work out is makes no sense to me at all. The purpose of working out is to excrete bodily waste, for lack of a better way of putting it. I mean, that's why we
Sure.
sweat. These are the bodily functions, and that's part of what exercise does for us. And when we wear a mask, we're inhaling our bodily waste. So
Yeah.
it kind of is counterproductive. It's like, okay, I'm going to the gym for this purpose, but there are lots of other benefits that you may get that have absolutely nothing to do with physical health. Like certainly like
Yeah.
exercise has a lot of cognitive benefits, mental health benefits. There's to even teaching you about yourself, right? So I think that you weigh out the pros and cons, and that is up to each individual to weigh that out for themselves and decide and determine which list is bigger, and then
Yeah.
they can choose where they want to comply or not comply. But
That's an excellent point. And another thing I wanted to bring up about, the the one thing that really, separates you from others, really the key message we're talking about here is, well, it's really not one thing, it's many things that separate you. But in an essence is the choices that you make and the actions that you take.
Mm-hmm.
And actually this was every kind of evident too, business related over the last couple of weeks. So I had a negotiation with a pre-existing client that I was going through, and we're talking about some things, and they had hired another company to do some other stuff, and basically what it boiled down to basically is just that, well, the reason you're paying me what you're paying me is because of seasonality and experience, and I've proven that to you,
Yeah.
by displaying it. And I basically proved to them that your value is determined based on what you bring to the table and the experience that you have, right, from a business standpoint. So
Yeah.
that's a differentiating factor on
Yeah.
the business side. But principally in life, it's the same. In fact, one of my most favorite quotes that I've been going back to probably over the last 6 months is Tony Robbins, that
Okay.
business is 90% logic and 10% execution. And that's actually true in life too, is just that, what's your logic like?
Mm.
Like that's a separating factor.
Yeah.
What's your logic like? Like, how do you think? How do you perceive the world? And I actually give an example to my wife recently. I said, okay, if you think that, if you think negatively, you're probably going to manifest negativity. If you think positively, you're probably going to, manifest positivity, right? And the example behind that is basically, if you woke up today and thought that today's going to be the end of the world, it might just be the end of the world.
Well, I would even add to that that it's going to affect how you see it. So there's I think we did another discussion about like where does truth really lie? There's your
Mhm.
reality, my reality, there's the reality. And I
Right.
think that if you see things negatively, the actual reality and of the circumstances may not have changed. They may not be good or bad, but if you see things negatively, they're going to continue to seem more and more negative. That's what you're going to see.
Yeah.
You see things more positively, then it may be the same situation, but you may have a more positive outlook and reaction to it. So
Yeah. No, and that really goes back to, talking about logic. I think logic is a huge differentiating factor in, how you think. And I think logic is also in part, a correlation of experiences that you've had in life too, because sure, I mean, there's right and wrong, as we know, but actually this goes back to the Instagram convo that I had with a friend. And, I actually brought that up. I said, I think logic and choices and actions that we make that
mm-hmm.
differentiate us from one another, and ultimately what makes you unique, whether it's in life or in business, is largely in part based on the experiences that we have. So, like, if you've had a lot of bad experiences in life, here's an example. So, I've had a fear of heights for like a long ass time, and this really goes back to
Pretty common, yeah.
like childhood where I fell off a swing, and as a result, for like 20 years, I wouldn't get on any kind of a roller coaster. I was
Oh
just
no.
scared shitless because
Oh.
of a bad childhood experience. But then I realized that, okay, this is a fear that I have two choices. I either overcome this fear, right, by just
Mm-hmm.
tackling it head on, or I let that fear dictate my life. And when you think about it, so long story short, I got on a roller coaster ride and I fucking loved it. I was like, this is
Yeah, it's so
awesome.
fun,
Like,
right?
I need to get on another one. But principally, that is a differentiating factor of what separates you from someone else, is because of the experiences that you had in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had good
I think
experience,
even more, a bigger differentiating factor is probably your reaction to those experiences. Two people can
Mhm.
have the exact same experience and react completely differently to it. And I think that's really more of a defining factor is how do you react to that experience? What do you do with that, with the experience, with the knowledge, with, the circumstance? How do you handle it?
Right.
And I think that's really what makes people so different and unique is that two people can have the exact same experience and react completely differently to it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. In fact, another story actually this morning, someone posted on Facebook about, oh, I'm tired, or it was along the lines of, is someone else as tired as I am every time I work out? And I started to extrapolate, the post, because I'm like, there's something not right about this post. Like, if you're tired all the time when you're working out, like,
Yeah.
you're probably exhausting your body. And come to find out, the guy works out every single day, like
Yeah.
7 days a week. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, you shouldn't be working out 7 days a week. You need one day to basically recharge your body because you're suffocating.
Yeah.
The other thing is,
Well,
are
especially
you
depending on what they're doing. You can't go hard at 7 days.
right? Right. And the next thing I asked is like, so what's the duration of your workouts? And he said, well, 45 to 60 minutes. I'm like, well, I work out 3 days a week and mine are 2+ hours. So like, you're doing about 60-minute workouts 7 days a week. You're wearing yourself out. Are you drinking water? And he's like, well, I'm not drinking enough water. And I'm like, well, all these contributing factors and what I just shared is ultimately what in part separates my workout from your workout.
Right.
And so that's kind of the point of what we're talking about here, because whether it's in life or it's in relationships or it's in business, and in fact, I've had some people that have actually asked me this. It's like, Ivan, you're in the marketing space, but like, you really don't like, self-promote so much. And I'm like, when you think about it, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in. The psychology factor is what matters more than anything. That's why I really doubled down for years on the psychology behind it, is because psychology is the driving factor. Here's in layman's terms. I could be the shittiest marketer in the world, but if my psychology and logic is superb, people are always going to want to go with me because they know that you create an emotional connection. And that's why people really relate. That's why people have relationships. That's why people thrive in their personal lives. It's because of the psychology and the logic. And I feel like so many people don't understand that, especially from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is that the importance of psychology and logic and attribution to things. I mean, that's what separates you from everybody else, is how you think. I mean, Tony Robbins, I keep bringing this up, is the reason the guy gets paid millions is because what he's got up here. Literally, like the brains and the logic and the psychology and the experiences that he's had, the story. Tony Robbins has a very powerful story too, not to mention, which obviously adds to this. But when you're looking to separate yourself, it's all these small things that I think people just don't value as much, because people think that, oh, there's no merit behind psychology. There's no merit behind logic. Bullshit. That's all of it. Literally. That's all of it, whether it's in your life or relationship. And I'll give you a prime example. Like this past week, my wife and I were just chatting. I said, I think communication is probably one thing that me and you just really need to double down on more. Like, we just need to talk more. I mean, not that we don't talk enough, but talk more, because communication helps solve problems. Communication.
But I think it's like, what are you discussing? I think a lot of people talk, but they don't necessarily communicate. And there is a distinction. Yeah.
That's a really good point, is to have strategic conversations.
Like conversation. Intentional. So, I feel like strategic in certain arenas, yes, but I think strategic implies that there's a manipulation, there's an outcome you're looking for. Intentional is a little bit different. It's like, what is my intention to, have this discussion? And because we can't control the other person's reaction to it. We can only control what we're bringing to the table and what we're trying to communicate and convey to them.
Absolutely. So a couple of things you mentioned there is control, control what you can, and I think whether it's, in life or relationships or businesses, I think as human beings, we try to control so much because we want to be able to have a full grasp on everything.
Well, because so much is out of our control, and I think that's scary to people. And so they try to control everything they possibly can because they're hyper aware of how little they actually have control over. So
that's a really good point. In fact, I'm sure you've heard this before, but like when you think about yourself as an individual, you're just this little tiny dot in the universe. In reality, you're just one fucking tiny dot. Not that you don't matter, that you're insignificant, but compared to the rest of the world, you're one tiny dot. Literally one tiny dot, and you can definitely make an impact by being solution oriented, being proactive, being strategic, being optimistic, and someone like me also being a realist. Like I'm far more realistic about everything in the world and everything around me than ever before, because like you said, there's so much that when you realize that, what, I can only control myself, really, my
Right.
actions, my intentions.
Right.
But there's so much around me that I can't control. Like, I can't control my environment. I mean, I can, but I can't. Like, for example, when I go to the gym and I walk into the gym and I'm like, there's like all these people, like, this frustrates the fuck out of me, honestly, is when you've got the high school kids that are over by the free weights and they're just dicking around and you see them not doing anything or trying to pick up, like, the 60-pound barbell, and then 2 seconds later you see them nearly dropping on their foot. I'm like really, what the fuck are you doing? Like,
I've dropped a weight very accidentally on my foot, and yeah, that's really.
it hurts.
Oh, it's yeah. Whatever.
It hurts.
Yeah.
But like, I can't control that. I can't go in and say, "Hey, stop dicking around." Like, there's people trying to use the free weights. Like, go be more productive. And this usually happens on like a Friday or like a Saturday.
Right.
Like, it's like in the slowest of times that I'll walk in there. But like, that's a prime example that, like, I can't control that. I
No,
can,
but
I
you can
can
change. You
bet.
can control the times you go, maybe. So you
Hmm.
know that that tends to be when they're around and when they're goofing off, and so you may say,
Right.
"Okay, I can change my schedule a little bit. They're less likely to be here and behaving this way during these times, and I have a window here." They still might show up. You can't, and something else may happen. But that's the sort of thing you
Yeah.
can control. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just it. Is like, control only the things that you can, and talking about differentiation from
Yeah.
one another, which is the main topic of this episode, is it's like
Yeah.
these are all these little things, that really just make such a huge impact. And when
Yeah.
you stack up all these little things, like, okay, how much do I really control? Like, how much can I really impact? Like, you realize that there's only so much that you really control.
Yeah.
Like, you can only control your actions. You can control your intentions. You can control what you do ultimately, but like, you can't control like what happens outside of your purview.
Right.
And that's really a huge differentiating factor from one another. Also, like, how do you perceive reality? What's your reality? We've talked about this
Yeah.
before. Like, how do you see the world?
Right.
Like, do you have a sense of gratitude, or are you constantly narcissistic? And in
Hmm.
fact, there's a shitload of people on social media. In fact, there's a lot of people that call them influencers that I follow that are actually extremely narcissistic. And
So many. Yeah.
like I'm
It's
like, okay, has society become narcissistic too?
narcissistic, and I find very like I don't know if we call it full blown sociopathy, but definitely really opportunistic in a way that
Hmm.
is quite abhorrent. I find
Yeah.
to see, and I think what bothers me so much is to see such a pervasive trend towards that, and where people are being rewarded for that type of behavior. It's almost not just trendy, but people are incentivized to continue that type of attitude
Right.
and behavior. Yeah.
It's, and this might be a different topic to discuss,
Mhm.
but you brought up a really good point about narcissism. Is like, I feel like this really goes back to kind of like the media also, is like, let's face it, the last time you read a positive story, something that was really impactful, something that really made you go like, oh, this is awesome, like maybe someone's helping the homeless and there's a big story behind it, or an abducted child was recovered after years of investigating, like something really really positive, right, that
Right.
makes you go like, oh, like there's some positivity happening in the world, right?
Yeah.
But like, in the reality of things, I feel like people gravitate towards um things that are very impulsive, things that are negative, things that are very controversial, things that are.
Well, there is that. There's truth in that, and there's actually a scientific rationale behind that. As human beings, we're wired to survive, right? So we
Mhm.
there's something it's called the power of the bad, and this is why it takes like five compliments to outweigh one insult. Because
Really.
yes, yeah, because we are wired, and this goes back to ancient man, where it's much more relevant for us to be aware of a lion or a tiger that's coming to eat us than
Yeah.
it is for us to be aware of, the nice flowers that are so pretty and smell pretty.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's nice. We want to be able to absorb that, but we need to be notified immediately if we're in danger. And so
Yeah.
it's called the power of the bad. So things that are negative impact us with a much larger magnitude, and they have a much bigger impact on us than things that are warm, fuzzy, and positive. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
that we don't recognize them or appreciate the good. It just means that it doesn't strike us the same way.
That's interesting, isn't it? Like how human nature, how human behavior is like actually so warped and kind of screwed up in a way when you think about it, because we
Well, it's so
gravitate.
biological. And I think that's the
Mhm.
thing, that as human beings, we've evolved so much, and we're such social creatures that live in this modern world that is very comfortable in a lot of ways. Not to say that we don't still have our struggles, we always will. We're
Mhm.
living beings and we're flawed. However, compared to ancient man, we live a pretty cushy life. And
Yeah.
so we forget, though, that so much of our wiring is biological. We don't have a whole lot of control over it. We know we have
Yeah.
control over how we react to it. We can become aware of it, but there's still biological forces at play.
No, I couldn't agree more. In fact, one thing that I actually wanted to share with you is when you were talking about all these things is so I stumbled across a really interesting article. So I've been a fan of like archaeology for a very long time. Like
Yeah.
it's probably something that I should have taken on, as a stronger initiative. But I ran across this article that basically archaeologists, I think it was in Jerusalem, is this it talked about how they uncovered a tomb where there's a very, very high possibility that actually Jesus Christ may have lived, and Mary and Joseph, actually.
I've seen this.
Like
Yeah.
there's like strong evidence behind this. And like I'm reading this article and I'm like, this is fascinating. Like this is like about human history, like the beginning of humankind, basically.
Right.
And like, but this article ain't gonna get shit for visibility, like because people are like, "Oh, this isn't interesting. Like this isn't like this isn't this doesn't jive me, doesn't excite me. Like there's nothing. It's educational, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not, I guess, polarizing. It really goes back to like, okay, well, I'm a person that has appreciation for something like that, but most people don't. And that's a differentiating factor because most people are
Yeah.
like, oh, what's happening in Hollywood, or, what's happening in politics, or, oh, what's the media talking about? I'm like, are you like trying to purposely stress yourself out and depress yourself? Like, because I feel like we do that to ourselves, or at least a lot of people do that to themselves because they choose the wrong things,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the
It's funny that you say that archaeology. I actually came one class shy of minoring in psychological anthropology. I didn't know it
uh-huh.
until I graduated. If I had known, I would have taken the one class and gotten my minor. But yeah,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that people intentionally stress themselves out. I think there's an element of it. There, it depends on what it is, but I think sometimes people feel it becomes kind of like a compulsion. It's like they can't break themselves out of it. It's almost like an addiction. They want to. They're like, oh, that's going to make me upset, but I need to know.
yep. No,
Um,
that's absolutely true. And honestly, I mean, that's the differentiating factor here. Another differentiating factor is what you choose to perceive. The things that you consume. And honestly, I was reading this somewhere. This is definitely not me, but someone said that, what, the might have been someone on social media that I was following that said, what, the older that I get, the less I give a fuck about stupid shit. And I'm like, I'm 40 years old, and I'm like, you know what? Like, there's so much that I just don't give a shit about. Like, I really don't. And most people are like, well, Ivan, why don't you care about this? Why don't you care about that? I'm like, why? Like, how is this going to add value to my life? Is it gonna
right.
is it gonna make me more like, the pandemic, for example? So we have a friend actually who, believe it or not, she's been like locked in her house since like March, and love her to death. Like,
Right.
we're very close. It's a family, close family friend, and I'm like sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, if I did that, I would become more depressed, more
Yeah,
anxious, more stressed,
for
and
sure.
like you start to wonder about things that you otherwise wouldn't wonder. Like you're starting to hallucinate almost to
Yeah.
the point. And I'm like thinking, I'm like, okay, there's literally things out in the world that happen on a daily basis that like maybe I don't perceive as stressful, but they might be to a lot of people. Like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? The fact that I could wake up, walk outside my house and get hit by a bus, it could happen. It could
Good.
very well happen. Or my heart might stop breathing, or I might suffocate, because I'm not like, there's so many things that can happen. But like, here's the reality. Would you want to wake up every day like worrying about things like that?
Right.
Because there are people out there that worry about stuff like that, Courtney. Like literally, they're so subconscious about it. Like, you know what? Today's gonna be my last day. I think that my time is up, and I'm like, you know what? If my time is up, my time is up. I can't control the inevitable.
It's funny because when the the virus scare first
Yeah,
came upon him came upon us, a lot of you were asking me like, "Are you afraid of it?" And I remember I was like, "Not really." And they were like, "Why? Do you not?" And people get so polarized. You're like, "Oh, you don't think it's real?" I'm like, "No, it's not even that." I mean, and in the beginning, I actually, we didn't know what it was, so of course I took it seriously. Like
yeah,
when you don't
yeah,
know, no, I'm not going to claim that I have all this knowledge when I know nothing.
right.
But I just didn't have a fear. I was kind of like, if that's going to be the thing that takes me out, it's the thing that takes me out. Like, what control do I have over it? I mean, I can sit and like lock myself up in my room, but
Sure.
if I'm going to, not that I wish death or, but like if
Right.
I'm going to go, I would rather at least have live my life, like, am I supposed to lock myself up in a room waiting for it? Like, what's the point of that?
I actually,
My friend's husband this weekend was like, yeah, they COVID can't take Courtney out because she's already beaten all the odds. I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel that way. Like with everything
yeah.
I've been through in my life, that's probably not the thing that's gonna take me out. And if it is, it is. So
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is perception is reality,
yeah,
right? And that's a differentiating factor between people. And I was actually talking to my wife about this because, my wife has an autoimmune disorder. And so, of course, we're very cautious about that because let's just face it, I get sick for a couple of days or something. She'll get sick for a couple of weeks or might not even recover. It's just how our immune system works. And so we talked about pain tolerance. And you actually mentioned this that I guess, in a way, my pain tolerance is actually pretty high because when I come to realize it, is it's like, or maybe my risk factor, that's probably it too. My risk factor is probably much higher.
yeah.
And so, but that's a differentiating factor from,
There's a gene for it. It's the RDR4 with the seventh allele. There's actually a risk taking gene. Yeah.
this is why you're on the show, because you have this level of intelligence to mention things like this. But you're absolutely right. Is that it's the risk factor, it's the pain tolerance, and like, I mean, it's a yes, it is probably a gene. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That probably has a huge contributing factor. But, where I was going with that is that, that's how people differentiate from one another. It's like, what did you, and, like when I look at the last 5 years, probably 6 years, it's like, there's just been so much that has happened, in my life that has made me realize that, what, like, okay, I've been through so much, like being bankrupt, and at one point we were told we couldn't have kids, and like had to move my family around so many times, and like just so many different things that I'm like, okay, none of that shit broke me, you
Yeah.
know.
You
So like
survived. Yeah.
it wasn't life or death, and I used to think that, like, literally when I remember when I was going through the bankruptcy, it was like, holy shit, this is gonna break me. This is
Hmm.
literally gonna put me out on the street,
Yeah.
and like suddenly I realized now going through this, like, no, it didn't fucking break me. If anything, it made me stronger.
Yeah.
And
What
that
does not kill
is
you makes you stronger. Yeah. Nietzsche.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think with you, Courtney, one of the things that I mentioned is that after going through so much that you have gone through, and again, for those that are watching and listening, please go and watch and listen to the Courtenay Turner podcast, the first episode. It's really an eye-opening experience. And if it's not, there's something fucking wrong with you. Like seriously, like if you can't, I mean, I guess I'm an empathetic person. That's another thing, you know. I'm very empathetic because, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are not empathetic.
It's true. Yeah, that is part of that's part of personality. Some people are very high on empathy, and some people are much lower.
Exactly. And so, but that's a differentiating factor. Courtney, I think is pain tolerance, risk factor, empathy. That really contributes to, not only entrepreneurship, but really like who you are as an individual, your
For sure.
personality
And
and character.
I think, and this could probably be a whole nother topic, but I think what's really fascinating about what you're alluding to is how much of our differentiating factors are intrinsic.
Mhm.
The age old nature versus nurture debate. My mom was a psychologist, and she would always say, we're a combination of nature, nurture, and fate, and never underestimate the power of fate. And
That's another thing actually. So we're talking a lot about psychology here and what separates you from everyone else, but so every successful person, every successful coach, every millionaire, even billionaires that I've ever met, Courtney, there's one constant that has been psychology. So they talk about mindset, they talk about a self-discipline, they talk about a self-love also. And like when I think about all this, it's like it really is all psychology.
yeah,
Because it stems from how you think, because your mind, by the way, I should have probably gone into psychology because I'm so fascinated about all of this. And now I guess getting older, being an entrepreneur, being a father, husband, going through all kinds of things, right? Over the last 5-6 years, like makes me realize like it's all psychology.
sure, yeah,
It's all psychological, literally. Like everything literally in my life that has ever happened has been a correlation to psychology in some form or fashion. Like the way I perceive things, like, okay, could I survive this? Yes or no? It's a psychological thing. It's how I think about it.
right.
The mind is really such a powerful thing.
Yeah,
The mind, in fact, there was a video I did a few years ago that I keep going back to is mind, body, and soul. If you get those three things in tune, you are literally unstoppable and you become the person that you probably always aspired to be. And there's a lot of people out there in the world that like they know deep inside, like, I want to be a better human being. I want to be more successful. I want to make more money. I want to be a better wife or better husband, or, have a better relationship. They know it deep inside, but they're so swayed by the mediocrity of the world that they forget to think for themselves.
yeah,
And you have to. You want to separate yourself from everybody else. Think for yourself.
yeah.
That's a good start. And stop worrying about.
This goes back to your discussion about compliance and conformity.
Mhm.
I
Exactly.
think this is why I personally have such an issue with conformity and to some extent compliance, because I think people really need to have boundaries on compliance. Compliance can lead to sheep mentality. It can,
Mhm.
there's, as the example I used before, you can make choices of where you want to comply, but
Right.
blanket compliance and where you just give over any of your own convictions for the sake
Mhm.
of complying does lead to a loss of independent thought. And independent thought is what makes us it makes us who we are. I always say, like,
Yeah.
it's great to have diversity, but diversity of thought is first and foremost to me always. That's
Yep.
what I value. I love, part of the reason I love conversations like this and talking to people is because you learn so much from other people, because everybody thinks differently. Everybody has
Absolutely.
unique perspectives and unique interpretations on things. It boils down to, like, we might both look at this pen and I see a, hot pink, neon pink, and we may agree that that's what this is.
Right.
But what you're actually seeing and what I'm actually seeing might not be the same thing.
Yeah.
So we could both try and describe it, and that description alone is fascinating. So, and that,
Yeah.
gets only magnified when you talk about, deeper concepts. So,
And that is, ultimately one of the things that, I wanted to focus on. And I think the more I think about it now, looking at the last 6 years of this podcast and how it has evolved and how it has grown and how it has shifted. And
Yeah.
it's really steering more to psychology. It really is, to everything psychological, between personal development, that's
Hmm.
usually psychological.
Yeah.
Anything that's really technology, family oriented,
Right.
marketing related, it's all psychology oriented. And I think, looking at, and I follow a lot of successful people that I aspire to be like one day. And I look at, all they talk about really psychology and all their content. It's all psychological when you think about it. But I think too many, like you said, perception is reality, and everyone has a different perception. Like you said, the hot pink pen. I may look at it and say, "Oh, that was just a pen." You look at it, it's like, no, it's a hot pink pen, because hot pink has a bigger significance to you.
Neon. It's neon hot.
Neon,
Yeah.
neon hot pink.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, amazing episode again, Courtney. I mean, for everyone that's watching and listening, I truly hope you guys are getting some serious value out of this, because it is such, when you really become a much bigger, more optimistic, and really, and that's one of the things that I know you bring to the table. And I absolutely admire the psychological angle of this, because it's a huge eye-opening experience that hopefully makes people realize on this show, like, how much there is out there. And you just stop being closed-minded, like, think for yourself. It's okay to focus on individuality, as long as you're okay with it, because at the end of the day, there's one constant: you get to live with yourself for the rest of your life.
So
And that is literally the one thing that you cannot change. Like, you wake up with
where you
yourself.
go, there you are.
Exactly. No matter where you go, there you are. So, with that, we're going to wrap things up for this episode. I want to thank my amazing guest, Courtenay Turner, who always brings the fire and the psychology and the mindset. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
again, guys, we'll be back on Friday, same time, same place. And stay tuned in for another hot topic. Courtenay, thank you so much. Have an amazing rest of your day.
You too. You too.
Bye-bye, everyone.